What does ATP look like?
ATP?
So, on to that in a second. So again, this right here is the entire steps of respiration. We're going to break these down. And notice there's basically 3 parts. Okay? The first part takes the first part takes glucose and breaks down into pyruvic acid. And that pyruvic acid then goes in the Krebs cycle. That was that huge thing that I showed you right here. Right? Yep. Okay. So that then goes from the Krebs cycle, and it takes Krebs cycle and then takes the energy from the electrons, goes to the electron transport chain, and basically every single time it's producing what?
ATP.
ATP. Because remember, the goal of cellular respiration is take glucose, just like plants do, and break it down into ATP. Okay. Now, the question was, what does ATP look like? Right. This right here is ATP. That was the question was, what's ATP? If you notice on ATP, there's basically 3 parts to it. The A stands for adenosine, which is right here. If my pen works.
How do you say that A word again?
Adenosine. Okay. In the big picture, yeah. I was looking in the wrong place. You don't have to write this down. Okay. And now, adenosine is actually it's actually this entire thing right here. Because not only is it the nucleotide adenine, it's also the ribose attached to it. And then it says ATP, which is T stands for tri, and then P stands for phosphate. So you notice we have 1, 2, 3 phosphates.
Well, that makes sense.
And that's what the energy is. Because really what ATP is essentially, you ever get those those little guns that shoot the little plastic balls out of them? Right? They have little springs on them. And you pull, no, like little kid guns. And you pull the trigger and the spring comes back and it shoots a little plastic ball out. That's basically what ATP is. Each of these phosphates is essentially one of those little plastic balls. And the bond right here is basically a spring. And so it wants to shoot off this phosphate. So it has lots of energy just already built up and really easily used. That's the reason why ATP is so it breaks that and releases that energy. Okay? That's the reason why ATP is used up. And then if we lose one of these, and that becomes ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate.
What does that mean?
Adenosine diphosphate or adenosine triphosphate. What?
It's okay.
So now it occurs in all cells. Okay, glycolysis occurs in all cells. So what you need to remember is this: that not only does it occur in an animal cell. Here's my little animal cell. I know it's an animal cell because it's round and has a nucleus. That's what that is. Okay, animal cells have mitochondria.
Can you draw this?
Yeah, go ahead and draw this in. So again, this is an animal cell. It also happens in plant cells.
Is that the mitochondria in that?
That would be the mitochondria. It also occurs in plant cells.
Why are plant cells square?
Because of the cell wall, they're square. The squareness is deemed by the square wall.
I learned something new today.
So the plant cell.
I didn't know there was
You need that one. So the plant cell does as well have a nucleus because it is a eukaryotic cell. It also has, we know this is a plant cell not only because of the cell wall, but also because of what's really big in it.
the vacuole.
The vacuole. And it also has a chloroplast. We went around our room. But it also has mitochondria.
And so does an animal cell.
So it's an animal cell. It's really a bad drawing.
And
Okay.
we have mitochondria, right?
Right. Because we're an animal.
Yeah. We're mammals. Basically.
Now, here's what you need to know. Ready?
Right now?
Right now.
Or right now?
Like right now, right now. Okay.
Just going in that
On,
box.
yeah, it's going to go down below. So I'm going to actually just write on here. So glucose has how many carbons to it?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Glucose has how many carbons? C6.
Six.
Right. So it's a 6 carbon sugar.
6.
Yep.
What did I do?
So glucose is a 6 carbon sugar. It's a big 6, little c, yeah. So glucose, which is a 6-carbon sugar, splits into 2 3-carbon molecules.
What does that mean?
It basically means it takes the sticks and just divides it in half, essentially.
Smaller glucose molecules?
Yeah, and so they're not glucose molecules at this point. They're actually called pyruvate molecules.
What is it?
Pyruvate. And so for this to occur, it has to use 2 ATP. So we've already used energy, but the goal is to create energy, right? The goal here is to actually create energy and make ATP. And these 2 3-carbon molecules are known as pyruvate. So we make 2 pyruvates. And in the process of making the 2 pyruvates, this generates 4 ATP. So if we use 2 and you create 4, how many do we get out?
6.
Nope.
Just get on the side.
2. Because we created 4 minus 2 ATP, that's 2 net ATP.
Why'd you use the 2 ATP?
Because part of the reason why we have to use the 2 ATP is because when we split the glucose apart, we actually phosphorylate it. We add phosphates to the 3-carbon sugar. Okay? Because pyruvate actually has phosphate in it. Okay?
Okey-doke. I already said that twice.
Now, so like I said, glycolysis, and this is all called glycolysis. Has a net gain of 2 ATP. And this occurs has a net gain of 2 ATP, and then occurs in the cytosol.
Oh, do we write occurs in the xylitol in this box?
Yeah, the last box.
Oh, last box?
If we need to make more ATP, we got to what? It's called what kind of respiration?
Cellular respiration.
It's also known as
Mr. Reed, please pardon the interruption. Please
Oxidative.
Raylan Pruitt, checking out in the office. Raylan Pruitt, thank you.
it's also known as oxidative respiration. So these 2 pyruvate, if we have oxygen, it goes into there. Oops, sorry. If it has oxygen,
That means without.
yeah, I know.
You meant with oxygen.
Yeah. So with oxygen, it goes into oxidative respiration, hence the term oxidative, because it has to use oxygen. If we don't have oxygen, it's going to go into fermentation.
And that's 2 oxygen molecules?
Yeah. Because oxygen is a diatomic element, so it actually normally comes around as 2 instead of just 1.
Whenever I read this, I'm just thinking it means without 2 oxygen molecules.
So oxidative respiration occurs in the mitochondria.
That's all we have to draw is just the mitochondria?
Or we're going to add some stuff to it. So basically, just add that.
Don't take up the whole box.
No, you can take the whole box.
I thought the mitochondria had like a swirly line in it. Like this.
It does. That's that part right there. That's this part.
Oh.
I'm just going to
Like going through the middle.
Does that say
Like
phosphate?
the pictures look
pyruvate.
You want to spell that for me?
Pyruvate is Pyruvate. Pyruvate.
Thank you, Mr.
So we take pyruvate, and if there's oxygen present, we're breathing fine, we're not working ourselves too hard. The pyruvate actually is able to go into the mitochondria. But with that pyruvate, we're also going to need to have what?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. So we're going to need to have oxygen and the pyruvate, and if that occurs, then it goes into something called the Krebs cycle.
Crab or crab?
Krebs. Krebs. Krebs cycle goes in a circle, because it's known as a cycle. Okay, so this is known as the Krebs.
With a B. I mean, a K.
With the B.
That was the Krebs cycle.
Craig cycle?
Krebs.
Craig. So
It's like
there's
the
a
scientists
there.
named that.
Yeah, there's neither. Krebs cycle.
B wasn't science.
Nobody wrote the laws of science. Seems mad.
Now,
So he is.
out of the Krebs cycle, we still haven't produced a lot of ATP, which is like 2. Okay. Out of the Krebs cycle, we then go through something called the ETC. It's electron transport chain. Okay. And the electron transport chain actually occurs on the inner membrane of the mitochondria. That's why I wrote up there. So write this down. Pyruvate
Is.
No, it's a V.
is a V, Pyrvate, with oxygen. We'll go through
Go through.
Will.
The Great Wall of China.
the Krebs cycle. So again, it has to have oxygen. If it doesn't have oxygen, we're going to go on to fermentation. But we have oxygen. If we're breathing enough, if we're pulling enough oxygen, it's going to go through the Krebs cycle.
I have a question.
Just
Who
one
came
sec.
up with that name, Krebs cycle?
Krebs was named after a guy named Krebs.
John Krebs.
Usually people back then are like
Mr. Crab.
Alexander Wolowitz. Like really long names.
Whoa.
The third.
Where'd you get that Walwich from? I like your dad's last name.
That was his name is Williams. Oh wait, no, it's Cooper actually.
My dad's last
My stepdad. That's cool. What did you say?
Is that CO2?
So what it says is that Krebs cycle. So in our Krebs cycle, after we get pyruvate with the oxygen, the Krebs cycle is going to go through, and it's going to produce 3 things. It's going to produce CO2, it's going to produce NADH, and then FADH2.
You sound really sophisticated when you're saying these letters.
It's-
Oh my gosh, look at Cody.
the Krebs cycle produces CO2, NADH, and FADH2.
You could be a cat.
Where does the CO2 go?
In the sky.
In the sky. Good. We breathe out the CO2. And then where does it go from in the sky?
In the crab. plants.
To the plants.
2 for 2.
Okay. So the CO2 we breathe out. So a product of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide, and so a reactant of photosynthesis is carbon dioxide. Okay, so keep this in mind, that just because photosynthesis occurs and it ends, doesn't mean that's the last part that the glucose or the oxygen are going to be used. Okay, then we take the glucose to the oxygen, or the plants take the glucose and the oxygen, and then it pulls it back into cellular respiration.
Was it kind of like that video we watched the other day with the deer?
Yes,
Video with the deer?
And the tunnel.
carbon cycle.
The fly or something?
No.
Now,
Oh, yeah.
It was about the nitrogen.
The nitrogen
came out the
cycle.
tunnel. You remember?
The poop came out the tunnel.
That's what it said. It was a tunnel. I didn't say. Yeah, video. It's a tunnel.
That was very well detailed video.
It's a good video. I like it.
Of course you
I don't know what they were
You're obsessed with deer.
I feel like Corey was actually
Deer's
I was? Sure.
What am I obsessed with?
Deer's pooping. That that too. That's kind of creepy.
I feel like our class doesn't understand what's happening.
What do you mean?
What the last word? Chain?
Chain. So again, the CO2 gets taken out. We breathe it out.
Wait,
So all we have left over is the CO2 is breathed out. So then the NADH and FADH2 basically carries what's called hydrogen, they're protons, H+. And it carries it to the electron transport chain.
Are we going to learn like protons and neutrons and electrons? I'm really good at this stuff. I'm the best subject.
So again, this is the mitochondria. And what the electron, so this is the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle goes on here. Here's the Krebs cycle. And it's going to kick out these NADHs and FADH2s. Okay? Now, when it does that, it's going to go through a series of proteins that are embedded within this membrane.
Looks like ribosomes.
They're made of proteins, so they're kind of like ribosomes, because ribosomes make proteins. So it's going to take this hydrogen. It's going to go through here.
Through the protein or through the squiggly line?
Through the protein. And it's actually going to pull, and what it's pulling actually is it's carrying electrons through each of these. This is the reason why it's called electron transport chain, because basically what it's doing is it's going through these like a train would go through different train stations. Okay?
Oh, so that's what my train map.
More or less, yeah. Okay? So the electrons are being pulled from the Krebs cycle and going through it's called a reduction oxidation reactions. And it's being pulled, so again, the purple is electrons. Okay, so it's pulling these electrons through this electron transport chain. Okay, now, if we zoom in on just this section right here, if I can do it right. So we drill just this section right here. Okay. What we've got is basically this. Okay, and this is inside the cell. So in mitochondria, like on the inside.
Looks like someone tried to trace our hand.
And this is on the, it's still in the mitochondria, but it's on the outside of the inside. Does that make sense to y'all?
Outside of the inside.
Outside of the inside, yeah. So it's like in the mitochondria, but remember the mitochondria have two layers. And so there's actually another layer right here.
It's like a two-story.
Kind of, yeah. So, and then we've got our proteins. Okay, and our electrons are being pulled through these proteins. And our electrons were these pink color, right? It's purple. So we pulled our electrons through these proteins. And as the electrons are being pulled through the proteins, all these hydrogens, okay, so here's a hydrogen, here's a hydrogen, all these hydrogens are being pulled through these proteins. So what happens on the outside of the inside of the mitochondria? What happens right here? What happens to all these hydrogens?
They escape.
They don't escape.
Like a jailbreak.
Is there going to be more
Outside of the
hydrogens?
inside.
Is there going to be more hydrogens out here or on the inside?
Outside.
On the outside. And we know that based on passive transport, if we have a lot of stuff on the outside, what happens to it?
It goes to the
It goes
inside.
to
It goes inside. And so all these hydrogens actually get collected. So here's hydrogen, there's hydrogen. And they all get collected into this big hydrogen collector site. And that big hydrogen collector site is called the ATP synthase. And this is that one y'all thought was an udder the other day? Y'all remember that?
I didn't think it was another.
Okay. Y'all thought it was an udder. Well, what did I say what happens to it whenever the hydrogen goes through?
It's like a motor.
It rotates, okay? And when it rotates, what does it produce?
ATP.
ATP.
Oh yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Okay.
I thought it was dolphin eggs, but I realized they're mammals.
So every single time it kicks out every single time it rotates, because of the hydrogen going through, it's going to kick out an ATP. Okay? Now, this produces a lot of hydrogen. So what does it produce a lot of? ATP. Okay? So remember earlier I said it's going to create me like between 34 to 36 ATP. This is where it occurs. This whole path right here, this electron transport chain, if you don't have oxygen, you can't get to the electron transport chain. And if you don't have this inside of this mitochondria to pump all these hydrogens out, you can't produce ATP. Okay?
You would die.
And you would probably, yeah, you would get really sick. You start being really painful, you wouldn't be nearly as effective, those kind of things. Okay? So that's all what happens if you have oxygen. Right? Got it? So let's add to that last, we do need to add one more step to it. Let's add that last step. Go.
We're not supposed to be drawing this, are we?
Yep. Okay, so the last box. Ready? So the last box, the hydrogen.
Y'all missed it at the end of it. Passed out from the other year.
What does that say?
The hydrogen pumps.
Called ejector.
The hydrogen pumps through.
Is that a hydrogen molecule?
Yep. Hydrogen ion. Hydrogen pumps through the ATP synthase.
Yeah, it's really down here.
It's not very easy on this.
Okay.
How is there no thing?
So it pumps through the ATP synthase, creating
What's the word next to hydrogen?
Synthase.
ATP pumps. So it creates ATP.
That's why I see
Technically 34 ATP.
power.
So, oh, okay, got it.
Can we put like 34 different diseases or something?
Yeah. So again, it creates 34 ATP because the hydrogen is actually being pumped back through the ATP synthase.
So I always wondered if like all these things in the cell have like their own house.
So again, if you do a lot of exercise, you get muscle cramps. But also, if you grow grapes, you can also produce wine because of fermentation.
And sugar.
Okay.
How does exercising and grapes?
How does this have to do with cell respiration? Well, what happens is that if, let's say that we are not a plant cell, but we are a fungus cell, specifically yeast.
That is a
Okay.
cell.
I take
Mushroom is a
I take a bunch of grapes and I squish them down and I get the juice out of those grapes. I then put it in a barrel and I throw a bunch of yeast in those grapes, that grape juice.
and sugar.
You don't need any sugar because sugar comes from the grapes. So if I then take that yeast will actually use the oxygen and do cell respiration. But if I cap off that barrel and I don't allow any more oxygen to get in, then the yeast will actually have to start using the grape juice that has the sugar in it to go through what's called lactic acid fermentation. Or sorry, ethyl alcohol fermentation, which produces the wine, the alcohol in the wine.
How long does it take?
It matters what kind of wine you're making.
Isn't it like 3 months, something like that?
I grew
But
grapes in my backpack.
To ferment, it takes about a month or two.
Money too?
It matters what you're fermenting. It matters what kind of wine and what kind of stuff you're making.
Did you major that in college or something? Wine industry?
No, it's called. Let's lay it on here. So again, the pyruvate does not have oxygen. Remember, we just got done with glycolysis, and we're like, oh wait, we don't have any oxygen. So pyruvate without oxygen will go through fermentation. So again, pyruvate without oxygen goes through
Fermentation.
fermentation. That's the O2. Now, fermentation it's basically two different ways. Either we can talk about fermentation with the muscles, right? We can talk about either the fermentation here with the muscles because we're working really hard,
May 11 holes deep.
and fermentation that goes through the muscles is known as lactic acid fermentation.